Okay. All right. So, funny enough, from our early conversation, we're not going to be using the TV screen tonight because we have a different thing. We have talked a number of times about the Talmud, and we've talked a number of times about Jewish law, and a number of times about Midrash. And these things are very big and very abstract, and that's why I sort of just put them in the beginning. We talked about them, and I referenced them here and there. But I wanted to show you a little bit of what it looks like, what it feels like to actually study Jewish law from the ground, from the foundation. So what we have here is a small section of the Talmud. This is taken from Bava Batra, page 20, side B. That's how we refer to the different pages in Talmud. And we're going to start with the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is the first written version of the oral law. And then the Gemara is going to analyze the Mishnah. We're going to go through and talk about all of this. But one thing I want to show you on the handout is you'll see some words are bold and some words aren't. The bold words are in the original text. The non-bold words, the little words, right, the light-colored words, those are the translator trying to help us, because the Talmud is written in a very shorthand way, right? Is it? Can't be. Why? Text one. Problem. Right? It's written very choppy. So what this translation has done is try to help us follow the discussion, and I'm going to help you try to follow it. Right? So I'm helping you get the help that it's trying to give you, because it's tricky. It's a different way of thinking, a different way of looking at text. But hopefully you'll see how one topic can have many different ideas in it and many different points, and why it is that this is an example of how Judaism makes decisions and why we do what we do. A lot of people will say, you know, Rabbi, I don't understand. Where in the Torah does it say ba, 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 ba? Right? Well, it says it, but you have to know how to read it. And we didn't just make up the reading, we worked it out together. So this is just a tiny, tiny little example of how the Talmud handles this. Okay? Got the idea? Okay. Are you still volunteering to read for me?
Okay, I will volunteer.
Okay. I may interrupt more than usual.
That's okay.
I may reread the sentence to give it more inflection. So, but it's a good start. So Mishnah, this is, remember, the first layer of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah that was finally written down around the year 250 CE. Okay, so that's what we're starting with, where it says Mishnah.
If a resident wants to open a store in his courtyard, his neighbor can protest to prevent him from doing so and say to him, I am unable to sleep due to the sound of people entering the store and the sound of people exiting.
All right. So what's our basic topic in the Mishnah? Well, it's all about real estate and getting along with your neighbors. In the ancient world, houses used to be like this. You had the main road, and then you would have we'll do it like that. You had a yard, and there was usually sort of a gate. And then you had house 1, house 2, house 3, house 4, house 5, house 6, any number of houses. And there was a courtyard. There was an empty space inside. And so let's imagine that I'm living in house 3, right? And I want to open a shop. Well, if I open a shop, you know, I want to put my little shop window open here, and I'm going to sell something from in front of my house. What does that mean for all of my neighbors? Is that fair? I mean, you could say, well, it's my house, I can do what I want. But the courtyard is our courtyard, so your neighbors have some rights. They have an ability to complain if you do some things, right? This whole section of the Talmud deals with things that are okay in front of your house in the courtyard and things that are not okay. Now, if I lived just by myself like that, all right, this is my house here, that would be okay, no problem. But because I share, how do we work this out? Because as we know, many of the biggest problems in life are problems with our neighbors. Right? Problems with our strangers, those are easy. Problems with our neighbors, I have to live with those people.
That's why we have HOA.
Because that makes everything so much easier, right?
We pay and they deal with that.
Depends on your HOA. Actually, I've got a pretty good one, but I've heard some horror stories.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So in this particular example, he wants to open just a regular store. And he wants to open the store, and the other neighbors can say, no way, right? They can prevent him from opening that because there's too much sound from the people coming and going and coming and going, right? It's no, this is our courtyard, not the marketplace. So they can say no.
I can see how eventually American law evolved so that we have residential areas and we have business areas, because this kind of argument, I could see that would lead to saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe we got to separate them.
Some of the activities.
Yes.
Right. All right. So that's the first sentence.
Okay. But one may fashion utensils in his house and go out and sell them in the market, despite the fact that he is not allowed to set up a store in the courtyard, and the neighbor cannot protest against him doing so and say to him, I'm unable to sleep due to the sound of the hammer you use to fashion utensils. Nor can he say, I cannot sleep due to the sound of the mill that you use to grind. Nor can he say, I cannot sleep due to the sound of the children. It is permitted for one to make reasonable use of his own home.
Now, notice that last sentence. That's not in the original. That's the translator's summary to try and help you figure out what they're talking about. Now, before we had translators doing that, we had the Talmud, the Gemara, trying to help us figure out what's going on here. Because that last section makes sense generally, which is, okay, I can't open a store, but I can sit outside and I can, carve spoons and I can make little things, and then I can take them and go to the market and sell and then take my money home and I'm okay. But it's not 100% clear what's the difference between the sound of me hammering and the sound of people coming to buy my stuff, right? Why is one okay and the other isn't? And also there's this whole question about children at the end, which seems totally out of left field, right? I mean, am I making children? I mean, what's going on here? So, but that's the basic structure the Mishnah gives us, which, as you can see, if we just finished with the Mishnah, we would still have a lot of questions. And that's where the Gemara comes in, to try and ask some of those questions and even answer them and raise all sorts of new questions that we haven't thought of yet. Good? All right, so we moved to the Gemara. The Gemara was the notes of the discussions of the rabbis who came later, who came after the Mishnah. And the Gemara was finally finished and sort of edited and published around the year 500 to 700, depends on which piece. So we're looking at another 250 to 400 years after the Mishnah before this is done. Make sense? Okay.
I find it fascinating too, because it's rabbis talking across centuries to each other. Centuries have passed, but they're commenting on each other's stuff.
Right.
Amazing.
All right. So the Gemara.
The Gemara asks, what is different in the first clause of the Mishnah, which states that one can prevent his neighbor from opening a store in the courtyard because the noise keeps him awake? And what is different in the latter clause, which states that one cannot protest when his neighbor performs labor that is noisy?
Right. So if they're both causing noise, why is one okay and the other not? Right. It's our question. That's the Gemara's question.
Abaye said, in the latter.
Abaye was one of the great rabbis in the Babylonian communities.
In the latter clause,
right, which is the one that says it's okay,
we arrive at the case of one who operates in another courtyard. That is, one cannot prevent activity in a separate courtyard that's connected to the alleyway in which he lives. All
right, so Abaye's proposal, right, his theory, is the type of work that's permitted, you still can't do here. You only can do that if there's another alley and you're doing it like back here, right? If you're doing it in your backyard, away from the rest of the houses, then it's okay. That's his theory. Now, you'll notice that's a theory. That's not going to be 100% agreed, because his opponent is going to say, that doesn't make any sense. But it's a theory to start trying to find those differences.
Yeah, Rava said to him, if so,
Right. It means if you're right.
let it teach that in a different courtyard it is permitted.
Okay, so this is one of the techniques the Talmud will use when it's discussing. It's something we've mentioned before, but we'll discuss it again, which is every word matters. Right? Every word in the Torah matters. Every word in the Mishnah matters. Every word in the Gemara matters. In Judaism, we believe words matter. Therefore, if you wanted to teach that it was okay to do it in another courtyard, then the Mishnah should have said it's okay to do it in another courtyard. But the Mishnah doesn't say that, right? The Mishnah says that the neighbor cannot protest him from making utensils to go sell in the market. It doesn't mention another courtyard. So how do you get to that conclusion, right? You seem to be inventing a new idea, and Rava is not happy with that. So,
and he says, why does the Mishnah not specify that it is referring to a different courtyard? But Rava said.
So now Rava is going to offer his alternative. Right? He's saying, Abaye, your idea doesn't make any sense because if you were right, the Torah would be written differently. But the Mishnah would be written differently. But it isn't. So we need another explanation that works with the words we've got, not the words you're imagining are there. Make sense? Okay.
So in the latter clause, we arrive at the case of school children.
Whoop, sorry. Unknown number, so it's probably junk.
We arrive at the case of school children who come to learn Torah in his house. And this ruling applies from the time of the ordinance of Yehoshua ben Gamla and onward.
Okay, so we're now going to begin to explain it and then take a quick detour. Right? So the beginning of the explanation is, well, consider the children. Right? Consider the idea of school children, because these aren't just children, these are students. And that's why it's allowed. So how do children fit into your work? You might be a teacher. Right? So remember, we had those three things: that you can't stop him from hammering, you can't stop him from grinding, and you can't stop the kids. How do we fit number 3 into that group? If we make the kids your students, because now all 3 of them are a job. You see how that works? Right? The first 2 are clearly a job. I'm hammering to make things, I'm grinding to sell flour or whatever. What are the children? Well, the children are my job because I'm a teacher. And if I have to bring the children into my house to teach them, because we didn't have schools all the time, then there's going to be noise. Right? I don't know if you've ever taught children. Children are noisy. So if I open up a school in my house, you can't stop me. If I need to hammer, you can't stop me. If I need to grind, you can't stop me. So he's arguing that the number 3 is different because I'm doing my job. But as long as we're talking about children, what are children doing coming to your house? That reminds us of the enactment, the ordinance, what's the right term? The decree of Yehoshua ben Gamla. He made a decree that changed Judaism forever, in a good way. I think you'll see. All right, so let's see what he said.
What was this ordinance? As Rav Yehuda says, that Rav says, truly, that man is remembered for the good, and his name is Yehoshua ben Gamla.
Okay, so first of all, Rav Yehuda said Rav said. This is, again, something the Talmud always does, which is if you know who taught it, you have to mention the name, right? Rabbi Smith said that Rabbi Jones said, right? You're giving the chain of teaching in order to show I'm not inventing this idea. This was what my teacher told me, and this is what his teacher told him. And what did they say? They said that Yehoshua ben Gamla, he was a great guy. But why was he so great?
Because if not for him, the Torah would have been forgotten from the Jewish people.
That's a pretty big accomplishment, right? He saved Torah for the Jewish people. How did he do this?
Initially, whoever had a father would have his father teach him Torah. And whoever did not have a father would not learn Torah at all.
Right, so that was the original state. right? Right after Moses took us out of Egypt, after we got the Torah, if you had a father who could teach, great. If your father was dead, or maybe your father was just not such a great teacher, tough, right? You don't learn much. Why is it the father that was the teacher?
Gemara explained, what verse did they interpret homiletically that allowed them to conduct themselves in this manner?
Right? Like, well, why was that their policy of just, if you've got a father, good, if not, tough?
Because they interpreted the verse that says, and you shall teach them, or come, to your sons.
Which means,
and that's in Deuteronomy,
mm-hmm.
to mean, and you yourselves, atem, shall teach, i.e., you, fathers, shall teach your sons.
Right, so it's a little play on word, right? That if you have to teach otam, you have to teach them, then atem, which is spelled with the same Hebrew letters, then you are the ones teaching, right? You yourself have to teach your own kids. So initially what they're saying is that people looked in the Torah and they said, teach otam, right? Teach them. And they said, otam, that sounds like atem. So that means each father is responsible only for his own son. And that was the condition, which, I mean, it sounds reasonable, right? Right? I mean, I shouldn't be responsible for his kid, and he shouldn't be responsible for my kid. I'll teach my kid, you teach your kid, and everyone's happy. Well.
When the sages saw that not everyone was capable of teaching their children and Torah study was declining, they instituted an ordinance that teachers of children should be established in Jerusalem.
Okay. So they said, all right, you know what? Some guys out there, they're not such good teachers. And their sons are growing up not knowing how to be Jewish. So we will create a school. We will make a school in Jerusalem. Problem solved, right?
Sure.
What's wrong with the solution? Just so you can begin to anticipate? Well,
not everybody's in Jerusalem.
Not everyone's in Jerusalem, right? One school for the entire Jewish people, and only in Jerusalem? That's not going to work out so well. And first we have to see why they picked Jerusalem, and then we'll see how they fixed it.
What verse did they interpret homiletically that enabled them to do this, establish school in Jerusalem? They interpreted the verse, the Torah emerges from Zion.
Ki mitzion tetzei Torah. Right, you've all heard that verse, right? From Zion comes out Torah. So they said, well, Zion means Jerusalem. So that means you should have the school in Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, the Torah will come out. Makes sense, right? Okay, but we're not done.
But still, whoever had a father, his father ascended with him to Jerusalem and had him taught. But whoever did not have a father, he did not ascend and learn.
Right, so fine. This still only works if you have a dad that cares. All right, if your dad takes you up to Jerusalem and takes you to the school, great. But if your dad's gone, or your dad doesn't care and forces you to go work on the farm instead, then you're still not learning. So it's a nice idea, but if it's still up to the individual families and you make it hard for them to do, then they're still not going to learn as much as we want them to learn. Still sounds like a problem we have today.
Yeah. Therefore, the sages instituted an ordinance that teachers of children should be established in one city in each and every region. And they brought the students in at the age of 16 and at the age of 17.
All right. So they would decide to put like a school in every district. And then when the kids were old enough that they were just about ready to go out and start their life, right? 16, 17 is just before you're starting to get married and things like that. Then they would have a big cram session and they would teach them everything they needed to know, and we're done. Problem solved? No. By the way, if you thought that like public education was a new idea, no, this is the first record we have of public education, of the country, the whole people, the community, making sure that there's going to be education for all the kids, not just the kids whose parents can bring them. So this is really important for the whole world to have this idea that there should be education for everyone, and we have to make sure it's not too hard to get to. So onward.
But as the students were old and had not yet had any formal education, a student whose teacher grew angry at him would rebel against the teacher and leave.
Right. Can you imagine trying to teach a high schooler
Yeah, 16-year-old
who had never been to school in his life? Right? Take a 16-year-old, stick him in a classroom and say, all right, now we're going to read Torah together. I'm out of here. And when they're 16 years old, what's the teacher going to do? Right? Grab him, tie him to the chair. Right? It's too late by the time they're 16 or 17 for many of the kids. Some of them it'd be fine, but a lot of them would rebel and leave. And even though you could say, well, it's his choice if he wants to rebel and leave, yeah, but we missed the opportunity to teach them when they were younger.
And then we will have adults who know nothing about Torah, which is what the problem was. And I could see if you said, wait a minute, you did that wrong, do that over again. The kid will eventually rebel. He doesn't want to be talked to that way.
Especially at that age.
At that age, that's right.
Okay,
It
so
was impossible to hold the youths there against their will. This state of affairs continued until Yehoshua ben Gamla came and instituted an ordinance that teachers of children should be established in each and every province and in each and every town. And they would bring the children in to learn at the age of 6 and at the age of 7.
That means they would start learning when you were just a 6 or 7, so what we would now call kindergarten, first grade. That's when you would start teaching them.
Sure.
And it would happen in every town, not only Jerusalem, right? Not just like the big town in the area, but every town needed to have a school. And it was the town's responsibility to make sure there was this school. And you start at 6.
With regard to the matter at hand, since this system was established for the masses, the neighbors cannot prevent a scholar from teaching Torah in the courtyard.
Right, to go back to our original topic, which again, notice it's the translator helping us. If you weren't used to Talmud, you would have forgotten about the original topic. But this is all to tell us that there's a reason why apartment number 3 can open a school, because it is required to have a school in every town. Therefore, you can't complain about the noise of the kids. You've probably all heard the term NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard.
Yes.
You never heard that phrase?
Oh, no.
NIMBY. So for example, everybody knows that we need schools, but do you want the school in your backyard? No, I want the school down the street, right? Everybody knows that we need prisons. Do you want the prison in your backyard? The prison should be far away. Everybody knows that we need something to clean the water, right, from the sewer. Do you want it in your backyard? So this is the case of NIMBY, right? Nobody wants it in their backyard, but they're saying you don't get to object, right? Schools are so important that if one opens up in your court, deal with it. Okay. On the topic of teaching.
Yes, concerning that same issue, Rav said to Rav Shmuel Bar Shelat, a teacher of children, do not accept a student before the age of 6, as he is too young, and it is difficult for him to learn in a steady manner.
So he's trying to answer the question that maybe you wondered, which is why 6 or 7, right? Why not start at 2 and get the kids when they're super young? And the answer is if you try to teach them, and they're not talking about like doing games or learning the Aleph Bet, they're talking about heavy duty learning, like, reading the story of creation and reading the stories of Abraham. You got to wait until they're 6 or 7, because if they're too young, it's just not going to work. But once they're then,
But from 6 or 7 on, from this point forward, 6 or 7, accept him and stuff him with Torah like an ox.
right? So basically, once you get him, you push as much information into him as you can, right? Just fatten him up, feed him up with all the Torah you can, right? You don't just sit back and say, well, if he wants to learn, maybe he'll learn, or not. It's like, no. It's rigorous. It can still be fun. It can still be interesting, but you have expectations that the child will soak up as much as they possibly can.
But that's interesting because kids actually want to learn.
Of course.
When my daughter was in 1st grade, my little girl, I used to teach at home to her. I homeschooled. It was so much fun to learn all new things. And one day she comes and says, Mommy, the teacher wants to talk to you. I go up to school. The teacher said, yesterday your daughter said to me, when are you going to start teaching? You're not teaching me very much. Tell her not to talk to me that way. Uh-oh. She wanted to learn. I could see when they say something. Kids want to learn.
Of course.
They're learning things. They're excited by it.
Right.
So this is actually, it sounds like so mean stuff like an ox, but it's really absolutely things to do with kids at that age. They want.
And more good advice comes.
And Rav further said to Rav Shmuel ben Bashelat, when you strike a child for educational purposes, hit him only with the strap of a sandal,
Right.
which is small and does not cause pain.
Right, which is basically like saying use a shoelace.
Yeah.
Now, use a shoelace,
Right.
not a whip.
Not a whip.
Right? With an animal, you might have to, whip the donkey or the ox or whatever. But with a kid, no. Sometimes, and what he's really saying here is sometimes you do need to discipline the kids. Right? Sometimes the kids are misbehaving. But when you fix them, when you discipline them, you can't hit them. You can't hurt them. Because if you hurt them, then they will feel education hurts. Right? Torah is pain. And that is ruining everything. So yes, you have to keep control. You have to make sure the class is well managed, but you can't do anything that actually harms the child, or else you undo everything that you're trying to do. So, all those, stories of people, smacking kids in schools, and it's just totally wrong. That's not the way you teach a kid.
Rav further advised him, he who reads, let him read on his own. Whoever does not read, let him be a companion to his friends, which will encourage him to learn to read.
All right, so the translator is interpreting this a little bit, but there's actually a variety of opinions about this sentence. Right, so one who reads, let him read, which basically means, like your daughter,
Yes.
if they're excited about learning,
Yes.
great, let them go. But if they can't read, or they're not interested in reading, or they're just, learning doesn't make them happy, let them hang out with the kids that are excited about learning. Now, the commentators argue, why is this happening? Why do that? Why not, if the kid's not interested in learning, if they're not a good student, if you keep them in the classroom, won't they cause problems? And they say, well, no, two is one, we have an obligation to teach every kid. And two, if you say, well, you're not doing well, you can go out and play. What do all the other students think? Wait,
Right.
so if I don't study hard, I get to leave? So that's my reward for being a not so strong student. So no, if he's not doing great, he'll stay, and hopefully the enthusiasm of the other students will rub off on him, and he'll become a good student and all of that. But if you let him go, everyone else is leaving too. So you can't just give up on kids and have them exit. Make sense? Okay. And we had this all figured out 1,500 years ago.
Yes, brilliant. With regard to a courtyard,
Remember our main problem, the courtyard?
the Gemara concluded that it is permitted for one to establish an elementary school to teach Torah, and the neighbors cannot protest.
Okay. We think we're done. We're not done.
The Gemara raises an objection to this ruling from a Baraita that says,
Okay, so what's a Braita? So remember we talked about the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the fully edited oral Torah that was put together and finalized by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi around the year 250. A Braita is a teaching from that same time period that didn't make the final cut. Right? It's still, people tell you, right? Oh, my rabbi taught me ba 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 ba. And it's similar to the Mishnah, but it's not official. So the Mishnah is kind of like the official record, and the Braita are like the personal records that people remember their teacher telling them about the same topic. And sometimes, if you have the Mishnah and it's confusing, a Braita may make it clearer. Or sometimes a Braita may contradict the Mishnah, and then we have to figure out what's going on. So that's why they're bringing up this Braita, which is to say, okay, I think I understand what the Mishnah means, but I've got another Braita and it doesn't seem to fit. So let's see if we can find out how to make it all work.
so this Baraita says, with regard to one member of a courtyard who wishes to become a doctor, a bloodletter, a weaver, or a teacher of children, the other members of the courtyard can prevent him from doing so.
Dun, dun, dun! Right? That seems to say the opposite of what we just figured out. Right? We just figured out that you couldn't stop apartment number 3 from becoming a teacher. But now we have another teaching from back when the Mishnah was being written that says you could stop someone from opening a school in the courtyard.
Right. This indicates the neighbors can protest the teaching of children in their shared courtyard. So the Gemara answers, with what are we dealing here? That is, when can they protest his teaching children? We are dealing with a case of Gentile children, as there is no mitzvah to educate them. In this situation, the neighbors can protest about the noise.
Right, that it's not actually a Jewish law that we have to teach non-Jewish children Torah, right? Because they're not obligated to Torah. So therefore, if you try to open a school to teach them, you're not fulfilling the community rule. You're just making money. You're just a tutor, for hire. And that means your neighbors, they can object, right? If your job is now bringing in all of these customers, meaning kids, and they're not coming for the mitzvah, but they're coming for some other reason, then your neighbors can say, no, you can't open a daycare here, right? If you're opening something to teach Torah for a mitzvah, then we can't object. But if you're just opening a school to teach math or to teach something else, then we can object, because that's just like any other job. There's no mitzvah level to it. Make sense? Okay.
Come and hear another baraita.
Right, so we have another teaching that is similar to what we've just had, and we think it might also make a challenge.
With regard to two people who are residing in one courtyard, and one of them sought to become a doctor, a bloodletter, a weaver, or a teacher of children, the other can prevent him from doing so.
Which seems to just be saying regular kids, right?
But the Gemara answers, here too, we are dealing with a case of Gentile children.
All right, so maybe that braita isn't a problem, right? That braita means something different than you thought it meant. Third time.
The Gemara suggests, come and hear another baraita. One who has a house in a jointly owned courtyard may not rent it to a doctor, nor to a bloodletter, nor to a weaver, nor to a Jewish teacher, a sofel, nor to a Gentile teacher.
Bam, bam, bam. Right? This braita specifically mentions a Jewish teacher.
This indicates that one's neighbors can prevent him from teaching Jewish children.
So now we scratch our head and go, wait a minute. Our Mishnah seems to say teaching Jewish kids the Torah is okay in your courtyard, despite your neighbors. But this other teaching from around the same time as the Mishnah seems to say you can't do that. We don't just give up. We have to try and find a way to what we call reconcile them, to make sure that both of them are correct. But that means we have to understand them a little differently than we did.
And does this mean that we're going to deal with the word sofed a little bit more?
A little bit, yes.
The word that they use for teachers,
yes.
Sofed. So with what are we dealing here? We're dealing with the scribe, the sofed of the town.
Right, so a sofer can mean teacher, and a sofer can mean scribe. Now in modern Hebrew, sofer always means a scribe, somebody who writes a Torah or who writes a mezuzah or who just writes documents. Remember, back then they didn't have computers, no typewriters.
No printers, nothing.
Right, nothing. Oh. And if you wanted a document to look good, you would get a professional to do it. And that professional was also called a sofer. So a sofer could be a teacher or a sofer could be a scribe. And in this case, the Gemara says, sofer here is talking about a scribe, somebody who writes.
That is news to me. It also mean a teacher.
Well, it doesn't mean that much in modern Hebrew.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't. We are dealing with the scribe, the sofer of the town, who does not teach children, but writes documents and letters for residents of the town. This type of work is not a mitzvah, a commandment, and since many people seek his services, the residents of the courtyard can prevent him from performing this job near their houses. Because you'll have people coming and going all the time.
Exactly. I mean, it's like becoming a lawyer, right? You're going to have all the clients coming and going to your house so that you can write up the contract and you can write up the will and you can do all those other documents. And the neighbors, they don't want the traffic, right? I mean, imagine in your own neighborhoods. I mean, nowadays, we don't usually have a gate and all of that, but we do often live on cul-de-sacs, yes. Roads that dead end, and there's just houses all around. Yeah. Well, if somebody in yes. 4 decided to open up a new business, and now there were cars driving into your neighborhood all the time, you'd probably be upset. And that's what we're dealing with here, is saying when we said sofer, we didn't mean teacher sofer, we meant writer sofer, and that you can still say because there's just too much traffic, people coming and going. Makes sense? And it was, of course, even worse when it was people walking past your house, not even driving. Okay.
With regard to the ordinance of Yehoshua ben Gamla and concerning the teaching of children in general, Rama says, from the time of the ordinance of Yehoshua ben Gamla, that school teachers must be established in each town.
Right, so that's what we already described.
And onward, one does not bring a child from one town to another.
Okay, so here's the question, which is, if I live in this town and 5 miles away, there's another town, and this town already has a teacher, does the town that I live in need to hire a teacher for my kid? Right? Or can the town just say, hey, walk your kid to the other town every day, right? Just walk them over there. We don't need a teacher here yet just for your kid or just for these kids. If there's a school nearby, it's good enough. And the basic answer is no. If it's a different town, that's not good enough. It has to be a local school. Make sense?
It says each child is educated where he resides, where he lives. But one does bring them from one synagogue where they learn to another synagogue. And if a river separates the areas, one does not bring the children across lest they fall into the river.
Right? I mean, we're not going to have the kids like going through the river,
Right.
In the water, because that's not safe.
We already saw what happened in the cave. And if there is a bridge spanning the river, one may bring them across the river. But if there is only a narrow bridge, Gamla,
Which happens to also be a play on
his name,
Yehoshua ben Gamla's name, right? A narrow bridge, a Gamla, and his name is Gamla, so it's kind of a little bit of a joke on his name.
one does not bring them.
All right,
to a
so
narrow bridge.
before you turn the page, this is a great example of how Jewish law can give you different answers to a problem that looks the same, right? The basic question is, we've got the synagogue here, and we've got the synagogue here, and can I take them from this synagogue to that synagogue? Yes. But if there's a river, no. But if there's a bridge, yes. But if it's a narrow bridge, no, right? The details matter. You can't just say, yes, take the kids to the next synagogue, and you can't take the kids to the next synagogue. You have to find the details that matter, and then in the modern world or in the Middle Ages, you would probably say, well, what if there's a forest in between the two? Now, the Gemara didn't talk about a forest, but what do you think? No, right? It's
Animals.
right. I mean, maybe nowadays it's okay, maybe, but back then forests were dangerous places. But what if there's a very clear road through the forest?
Yes.
Then yes, right? But what if there are lots of bandits in the forest? Then no, even if there's
It's any danger for the children, you cannot let it go like this.
and that's how the Talmud trains us to ask the right questions and to find answers that fit our circumstances. So nowadays, what if there's I-4 in between?
Unless you have a car.
So if you have a car, or if there's a bridge, then maybe, but if it's a narrow bridge, no, right? So in modern circumstances, if we were trying to design where to put schools, we would still be asking the same questions and still be using the Talmud to help us find the answers, even though they never heard of a freeway. I thought you had your hand up, I thought.
Yes, I was thinking that it also depends. All of this is different interpretations from the different rabbis, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, it depends on the rabbi. If the rabbi, I mean, this is me thinking.
Mhm.
Well, you say this day I-4.
Right.
If the rabbi is Orthodox or if the rabbi is conservative, the
Well,
answer will be different.
possibly,
But
right.
at the same time, back then the interpretation doesn't have to do if the rabbi is from a different school, like from Hillel or
Yes.
Shammai. Did that change the answer depending where the rabbi comes from?
So the things that are clear in the Talmud, everybody agrees on. But so if somebody says there's a river, but the river only has a narrow bridge, Orthodox, conservative, Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, everybody agrees you don't have the kids walk the tiny little balance beam.
Right.
What happens is when you have conditions that aren't exactly like they're in the Talmud, now this is where you have judgment, where you need the discretion of whoever is making the decisions for the community on this topic. So let me give you a slightly different example. I-4 was a bit of a joke, right? But what about, the 1792? It's not a freeway. There are lights, right? There are traffic lights and crosswalks. But some people might say, yeah, but it's still, if you put the school on the other side, are the kids really going to use the crosswalk? Or are the kids going to run across the road where it's shorter? Because the crosswalks, are like half a mile apart. So you could get one rabbi who said, no, this is like a dangerous river, and you're not. And another rabbi could say, no, this is fine. And it wouldn't matter whether they were Orthodox or conservative or Reform. What would matter is their analysis, their assessment of that situation. And that's where choosing the rabbi to make decisions for the community is important to the community. And if the rabbi keeps making decisions that the community thinks, you're crazy, right? Sure, the kids can walk right through that forest. No problem, just here. We'll give them a sword, and that way they can fight against the bears. Then people would say, you know what? I think we need a different rabbi. And that was for a long time how communities worked, is the community would have the rabbi would make decisions, and the community accepted it because they accepted the rabbi. Now, of course, history has changed things, and the rabbi and the community have a different relationship. It's still somewhat the same, but it's not like this as it was. And then it becomes more political in the modern world, where you have
background. It may affect it, but not as much.
Absolutely. I mean, I could tell you that if you had an Orthodox rabbi whose sister had been killed on a busy road when he was a little boy, he would probably be, nope, you can't have the schools on the two sides. And if you had a different rabbi, Orthodox, conservative, whatever, who used to live by a busy road and it was no problem and the kids were all safe and there was never an accident, they'd probably think it was fine. So personal experience and personal understanding of the situation makes a difference in the judgment. But they are both still valid Jewish judgments, because we're using the tools that the Talmud has trained us to use to be able to make the Torah fit a real life. And there's no answer key, as I've said before, right? There's no way to check if 1792 is in or out. But we do have a way of saying, how did you get to your answer? And if your answer was, I flipped a coin, and then you did it wrong. If your answer was, well, I looked at the Talmud, I looked at other situations, and I read about schools in Italy in the 1500s, and I read about schools in New York in 1910.
Or the needs of the village or the community.
Exactly. And
different than other ones.
I looked at the zip codes, and I looked at whether there could be another school closer, and there were. Now, even if you come to an answer that's different than another rabbi, your answer is still okay, and his or her answer is still okay, right? You can get two different Jewish answers that are both fine on something like this, right? Murder, no, not so much, but something like this, if you're using the right steps, then you can have more than one right answer. And that's the beauty of the Talmud, is it doesn't try to teach you all the answers. It tries to teach you how to find the answers by teaching you how to ask questions and to come to those decisions in the right path. And that's what gives us the derech. That's what gives us halacha, the way of living Torah. Because you can't just memorize the right answers. It doesn't work like that. You have to train yourself to think, how can I find the answer that we need? Make sense? Okay. We're running out of time. I'm trying to remember exactly. Yeah, we can zip through the end. It's not too bad.
Rabba said the maximum number of students for one teacher of children is 25 children.
Right, so think about that. 1,500 years ago, we were already working out maximum class size, right? And maximum class size was 25. Most schools that are public schools nowadays are over 25. So yeah, most schools are like 30. So we, in Judaism, we want more teacher to students.
And if there are 50 children in a single place, one establishes 2 teachers so that each one teaches 25 students. And if there are 40 children, one establishes an assistant, and the teacher receives help from the residents of the town to pay the salary of the assistant.
That's to say, you don't make the teacher pay for his assistant. If a butcher needs an assistant, the butcher pays.
Yeah.
But if the teacher needs an assistant, the town pays, because the town is paying for the education of the kids. They're not just hiring the teacher to fix it. They are paying the teacher to teach this much, and they'll pay an assistant to teach a little extra if they're in between 25 and 50. And once they hit 50, you get 2 teachers, and the town's paying for both of them too. Make sense? Okay.
And Rava said, if there is a teacher of children who teaches a few subjects, and there is another who teaches more subjects than him, one does not remove the first teacher from his position to hire the second, because perhaps the other teacher will come to be negligent due to lack of competition.
Okay. So if you got 2 teachers in town, and one seems to teach more than the other, you don't fire the weaker teacher. You keep both of them. And because if you don't, then the one who's the better teacher will say, hey, I got it made.
Right.
Right? There's no more competition. It's just me and my assistant. So maybe I don't have to work so hard anymore. And the idea is, no. We want both teachers to keep working hard. And the one who's not doing so well, we'll encourage him to improve so that he can compete with the other teacher. And that there was competition among teachers. It wasn't like schools now where, the city tells you, you go to this school, you go to that school. Parents could choose which teacher to send their kids to.
And then Rav Dimi said, on the contrary, all the more so is it the case that he will teach in a better manner if he knows he's the only instructor in the place, because jealousy among teachers increases wisdom. The one who was dismissed will try to refine his skills so that he'll be rehired, and this will prevent negligence on the part of the other teacher.
Right. So Rav Dimi had a different theory about human behavior, which is if you fire the one guy who's weak, he's going to go work harder to come back and overtake the guy who they fired him for. That if you keep a little rivalry between the teachers to try and get the top position, it'll make better teachers for everyone. And yes, in general, you want to have enough competition. Not so much that teachers, go gray and can't earn enough money, but just enough that they each are all trying to get better and better.
And the other guy who you kept, he knows that you might get the other one back, so he will work harder.
Exactly. He's not gonna slack off.
If there are 2 teachers of children, one who teaches a lot of material but is not precise in his statements, and one who is very precise but doesn't teach a lot of material, one hires the one who teaches a lot of material but is not precise. Why is this? Errors will be corrected by themselves and no lasting harm will be caused.
Right? So basically what they're saying is, when kids are little, if you can get a teacher who can throw a lot of material at them, but some of it the kids will make mistakes with, you know what? By the time they grow up, those mistakes will eventually fix. You can fix mistakes. You can't fix ignorance, right? You can't fix zero, right? If you give somebody 100 pieces of information and 5 of them are wrong, you can fix the 5 that are wrong. If you give someone 95 pieces of information and all of them are right, the 5 that they're missing, they never get. So the argument is, give them more and we'll fix the edges. Make sense?
Except for Rav Dimi, who said,
right, which you notice he's arguing both of these cases.
One hires the instructor who is precise and does not teach a lot of material, because once an error is taught, it is taught and cannot be easily corrected.
Which, as you can see, just like today, there are still arguments about how you should teach kids. And both of them have a good opinion. Both of them have good points. And this is why when you're trying to hire a teacher, you have to balance. One teacher is really able to teach a lot more, but sometimes the kids don't do as well on the tests. And another teacher, they get great on the tests, but only the tests. Well, we want both, but we don't always get both. So how do we balance it? Do we balance it that the one who teaches tons, but they're getting 50%, we probably don't want him or her. On the other hand, the person who can teach, 1 + 1 is 2, and they always get it right, but that's all they teach, we probably don't want him or her. We have to find the right mix and the balance. Exactly. All right. So this is just a little taste. I wanted you to see a little bit how the Talmud worked, both on legal matters of who can open up what business where, as well as on how we do the midrash of atem and otam, of how we read the words of the Torah, or ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, the Torah comes out of Jerusalem, of how we use those verses to help guide our understanding, as well as how we have to analyze situations using this process in order to come to conclusions we can reliably feel are valid Jewish opinions, because we don't have the answer key. Right? There's only one who has the answer key, and he hasn't shared. But he did share the process. And so thank you very much for hopefully this interesting taste of Talmud.